program which is in the backup flight computer. It's called the backup flight software, and are going to re-enter that program into the computer. We had thought that this particular problem had gone away, but apparently it had not. And we are also continuing to look at the problem with the number 3 fuel cell.
That was the voice of Hugh Harris, voice of Shuttle Control at the Kennedy Space Center.
Appears to be that the production of water is higher than it normally should be. And the problem with the backup computer may well be solved with the reprogramming of it. It's approximately a 7-minute operation, and we have about 45 minutes remaining in our hold capability at this time. So the countdown stands at T-minus 9 minutes and holding. This is Shuttle Launch Control.
Hugh Harris at Shuttle Control here at the Kennedy Space Center. He's the Chief of Public Information, and when Al Bean says that they say on the network, he's not talking about the great and glorious CBS network. He's talking about the NASA network, just that kind of conversation. Now let's try to translate and expand a bit on what Hugh Harris was telling us there. Leo Krupp, what's the significance of that?
Well, they had a previous problem with the backup program, and so they thought they had it solved, but since they're in a hold now, I think they're going to go back and make sure and dump the program and set it up again, just to really ensure that the backup program is okay.
Think they see a possible problem in the fuel cells. Not sure whether it's in the fuel cells themselves, maybe it's in the indicators. They want to reprogram the computers. We have 5 computers on board this spacecraft.
They're only talking about the backup computer, which is usually GPC number 5. So they're just going to dump that program and reprogram it.
I think it might be worth mentioning here that there are 134 million bits of information in those computers, and that they work 10 times faster than the Apollo computers which took man to the moon and back. Al Bean, anything to add on that? I mean, where we are with this story is that the liftoff, which had been scheduled for 6:50 this morning Eastern Time, has not happened. Indication of a possible problem with the fuel cells, perhaps just a problem with the indicator. The astronauts are in the Space Shuttle Columbia. Al Bean, what would they be thinking right now besides expletive deleted, we wish we'd already gone?
They'll be thinking that, but they'll also be thinking that, no, this isn't the sort of thing that they didn't expect to happen and didn't know what, but they didn't expect a perfect launch. We want one, but then we expect some minor problems, and we're hoping this one's minor, and we'll just have to sit here and find out.
Well, I know you don't like to guess, but if you had to venture a guess at the moment, what would be your guess? Are we talking about a delay until we get further information of a few minutes, or perhaps as much as a half hour, 45 minutes?
Well, I kind of think we're going to find out here in a few minutes. We've got a number of engineers, Rockwell and NASA. They're working on the problem, looking at the problem. Very quickly, they're going to come and, I think, let us know how serious it is. They'll be able to figure it out. The problem with the backup computer is, as they mentioned, it's going to take something like 7 minutes to dump that computer and reprogram. So we ought to have some information on it in about 7 minutes, or which would be about 3 or 4 minutes from now. So things are going to happen here in the next few minutes.
Well, I'm told that they can sit for 65 minutes only before having to recycle back to an earlier point in the countdown. Is that correct?
I believe so. It depends on how close you get to launch, what valves are open, etc., and how long you stay there, whether you can go from that point or you have to back up and kind of take a relook at some of the things that have happened, make sure the pressures, temperatures, and things are right. And each situation during launch is different. So we'll find out what they have. We just don't know, and we're going to have to be sitting here for just a few minutes, and I think Houston is going to be telling us, and KSC is going to be telling us what we're going to have to do.
This is Shuttle Launch.
For those of you who may have joined us late,
follows in 30
everything
seconds.
seemed to be going along so very smoothly until shortly before the scheduled liftoff time at 6:50 a.m. Eastern Time this morning. Then there was an indication of a possible problem in the fuel cell. Then there was an indication that perhaps it was the computers and the indicators that were not in the fuel cell itself. That's what they're now checking out. The astronauts are in the space shuttle waiting this problem to be worked out. And here's the voice of Shuttle Control, which perhaps has more details.
This is Shuttle Launch Control at T-minus 9 minutes and holding. The one problem which we were taking a look at, which was the number 3 fuel cell, has been determined to be satisfactory at this time, and it appears that we will be able to go ahead with the countdown from the standpoint of the fuel cells. However, we are still in the process of working the problem with the backup flight software. That software has been dumped and is being compared by the engineers at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. We're standing by to hear whether that comparison is satisfactory and whether or not we can pick up the countdown in the next few minutes. Both the commander, John Young, and pilot Bob Crippen are involved in this process of comparing of the flight programs. This is Shuttle Launch Control.
All right. Now, as soon as you started saying that, I noticed you broke out in a wide smile, you broke out in a wide smile, and everybody gave it this. Why?
Well, I felt the fuel cell problem was potentially the more serious of the two, and I think they can fix the backup software faster than they could if they really had a bad fuel cell.
To review, Dan, we've got 5 computers on board. 4 of them have software in them or programs in that work together as the primary guidance system. 1, the 5th computer, has similar software, and it's the one you go to if all other 4 don't work. And so they can't lift off until they've got this one computer and its software working properly. And of course they won't unless they're all 5. But this one is particularly important because it's your, let's call it your last-ditch computer to go to in the event something was basically wrong with the other 4. And like Leo says, they can fix software pretty good because they dump it out. If they don't like it, they put something new back in.
In the Soviet Union, it's been almost 6 years since Americans went into space, as the Soviets keep pointing out, and during that time, the Russians have been very busy. Now, what have they been up to anyway? And how does that compare to our own program? Gordon Josiloff reports from Moscow.
That depends on the evaluation of the...
From its beginning, the Soviet space program has been spurred on by an obsession to beat the Americans, for reasons of both prestige and security. The world's first spaceman, the late Yuri Gagarin, told interviewers after his historic flight 20 years ago this month, "We shall always try to be ahead." The Soviets have never stopped trying. They have not matched the U.S. moon landings, but they have logged thousands more man-hours in space than Americans. Charles Sheldon, a U.S. expert on the Soviet space program, told CBS News correspondent Steve Young that on a strictly defined basis, the Soviets are winning the space race.
Well, if one's talking about numbers and size of program, I would have to say, yes, they're winning. But, of course, it's really a very difficult comparison to make. Perhaps both programs essentially are so strong that it's not as one-sided as the numbers alone might seem. But that ability to keep functioning and to have a steady program that year in and year out is putting up useful things and doing it for the most part very reliably is quite a record.
The record shows that since the last Americans flew in space in 1975 during the joint Soviet-American Apollo-Soyuz mission, the Soviet Union has sent more than 36 cosmonauts into space. Among them have been non-Soviets from socialist nations. With each liftoff from the Baikonur Central Asia launch site, the Soviets have additional opportunity to refine old techniques and to develop new ones, to become increasingly competent and confident. Soviet recovery procedures are almost reflexive. Landings are accomplished with near pinpoint accuracy. The post-recovery techniques for all concerned are by now well practiced. Soviet space hardware overall is not as sophisticated as American equipment, but it works, and works for a long time, as demonstrated by the Salyut 6 space station. The 20-ton house trailer-size orbiting laboratory is still going strong after 3.5 years in orbit. It was supposed to last 1. Western specialists say the Soviets are planning a 10 or 12-man station, and their long-held goal of a permanent presence in space is not too far off.
I think within the next 2 years we're going to have a permanent Soviet manned presence in space. They're very close to it now. The question of a Soviet shuttle is one of the more elusive ones. We've had the U.S. Secretary of Defense saying they do have a shuttle in the making. On the other side, we see the absence of the kind of engines which are now in our shuttle burning hydrogen as well as operating under very high pressure.
If the American shuttle proves a success, Western specialists believe the Soviets would have to follow suit eventually. In any case, the outlook is for more crowded space lanes amid renewed Soviet-American space rivalry. Gordon Josoloff, CBS News, Moscow.
Problem with the backup software program in the computers on board the orbiter.
This is the voice of shuttle control.
Was received, though, just recently. One of the major constraints that has to do with the extension of a hold or the time that it takes has to do with the inertial measurement unit, the pre-alignment of that for flight. That is the constraint which originally said that we had only about 50 minutes left remaining in the hold while we were in this particular hold. We have heard from Houston that the platform appears to be so stable that it's possible we could go possibly beyond that without recycling to the T-minus 51 point in the count to begin that pre-flight alignment once again. In Houston and here at the Kennedy Space Center, they're continuing to work that software problem to determine whether or not we'll be able to go ahead with the launch this morning. This is Shuttle Launch Control.
What you see is the Space Shuttle Columbia, the three parts of it, the solid rocket boosters on the side, the big external tank, and the orbiter itself, the smaller of the three, just off to the left in the center of your screen. We're now approximately 12 going on 13 minutes past the time that we'd hoped to have a launch of the Space Shuttle Columbia. As you just heard from the voice of shuttle control here at the Kennedy Space Center, the problem with the fuel cell, the talk of a problem with fuel cell, is now fading. The present hold is because of some difficulty with the backup computer, software in that computer. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Albeen or Leo Krupp. They wanted to look into that, see whether in fact they have a problem. Anything you need to add to that to help our audience understand why this delay, Albeen?
Only that one of the things they just are in the process of doing now is powering down the computer to a standby mode, just as it was when they got in the spacecraft, and powering it back up again to see if reinitializing it this way will perhaps solve the problem. We'll find out whether it does or not very quickly. One of the things they pointed out also on the NASA network there was the fact that they were concerned that if the IMUs remained free as they are right now for longer than a certain amount of time, that they would have to recycle back to 50 minutes.
IMU being what?
Thank you. Inertial measurement unit. It's the thing on board that tells you how fast you're going and which direction you're going. But the platforms are so stable and holding their own right now that it looks like they're not going to have to recycle back for that constraint at the moment. So things are looking good if we can just get this backup computer loaded.
CBS News coverage of the Space Shuttle Columbia will continue after this pause for station identification.
This is CBS.
Satisfaction.
This CBS News special report, Wings in Space, continues. Here again is Dan Rather.
Well, the wings of the Space Shuttle Columbia are not yet in space. They're still on launch pad 39A out there as a beautiful day dawns here in Florida. The scheduled liftoff time, 6:50 a.m. Eastern Time, has gone by the boards. The crowds have become larger and more restless as the minutes tick by. The problem is, at the moment, does not appear to be an insurmountable one, but it's a little early to say that. The best that can be said at the moment is that a hold has been put on the launch while they check out a possible difficulty with a backup computer. Now, this computer is located not in the cockpit area where the crew actually works and would live while in orbit, but in the general area of midship. Is that right, Albeen?
That's right. When they go downstairs or through their hatch in the place where they eat their meals or have most of their storage, if you move the storage boxes out of the way, it would be located in an electronic compartment right behind there.
And that's what they're checking out at this moment. As we all know, one of the reasons that the space shuttle was built was a military reason. The Defense Department has big plans for the spacecraft, and the Russians of late have been complaining about that. Ike Pappas reports on what the Pentagon has in mind.
The construction underway at Vandenberg Air Force Base, California, is evidence of the military's deep interest in the shuttle program. At Vandenberg, the Air Force is building its own multi-billion-dollar facility to launch and land the shuttle. A shuttle and satellite control center is also planned in Colorado. In all, the Air Force is investing more than $3 billion in shuttle development, double the original amount. The Air Force is, in fact, going to be the shuttle's biggest single customer. 11 of the first 48 flights will be totally military in nature. Most of the missions will involve the deployment of super-secret intelligence gathering and navigation satellites. The Air Force considers the shuttle a kind of truck to carry workers to their jobs.
It opens opportunities that we've not had before. We can now imagine going up there and fixing things that are broken, and we can imagine in time assembling things in space that are larger than we could transport in one load.
But it is that ability to rendezvous with orbiting satellites that is causing some concern.
Some people have described the shuttle as having the potential of not only launching satellites, but stealing other people's satellites, going up and destroying Soviet satellites. Is that feasible?
In a technical sense, I suppose it could be done. We certainly have no plans to do anything like that, and I don't really think anyone would imagine that we would do it. It would obviously be an observable event and not a very friendly event.
An act of war, wouldn't it?
Certainly.
I don't think anything would be done without the approval of the president in that line. And
There is the criticism that the military leadership in this country sees in the shuttle the potential for opening up the use of space as a battleground.
space is like an ocean, a new frontier, and how it will be used is certainly something that I don't think people can really say. But there's a potential for misuse in any technology, and it's the controls that this country puts on, and this country has pretty fine controls. The civilians are in charge, the military are not.
The Soviets, too, are working on their own version of a space shuttle. One small unmanned type has already been tested. Pentagon officials believe the Russians have given the project a top priority. But by most estimates, it will be several years before the Soviets can hope to do what the United States is about to do with its shuttle. Ike Pappas, CBS News, the Pentagon.
We will have to recycle to the T-minus 20-minute
Shuttle control at
in the near future,
the Kennedy Space
depending
Center.
on
Let's
what
pick it up in progress.
determination is made in the next few minutes in order to reconfigure and get into the proper posture to go forward again. One of the determining factors in the ability of us to hold is the inertial measurement units. We are coming to the point approximately 20 minutes from now when we would have to go back and realign them, and that requires going back, at least for that, to the T-minus 51-minute part. However, most of the systems would be held at the T-minus 20-minute point, and that is what the hold clock would say. At the present time, we are dumping the general purpose computers and having them analyzed at Houston. This is Shuttle Launch Control.
Shuttle Launch Control, well, there's an old saying that to err is to human, but to really foul things up, it takes a computer. And that's pretty much what we have at the moment, isn't it? Out on Launch Pad 39A. But you said just a few moments ago in listening to the Hugh Harris and the voice of Shuttle Control that you smiled and said, well, it's looking good. What did you mean by that?
Well, it looks like what they've done is decided to offload the software and the other four of the basic primary computers and take a look at that also to compare that with their backup computers. So I guess the good news is not that so much as the fact that it looks like the inertial measurement units that we have 3 of them, are settling down real well. They're measuring accurately, and if we do get this problem fixed in a hurry, we won't have to recycle. If it takes a little bit longer, we may have to recycle back to about 20 minutes, I believe, and then realign the computers, and then we can go from there. But we'll find that out very soon.
And it's important for everyone to keep in mind that there's still 6 hours on this day left in which to make this launch. Plenty of time to work out this problem. No one can say with certainty that this is not a deep and abiding problem, but the outlook at the moment is that it may not be. Our CBS News coverage of the spaceship Columbia and its hope for a launch will continue in just a moment. The hold continues for the launch of the Space Shuttle Columbia, and once again, using our model, we'll try to put you in the picture as to what's happening. The Space Shuttle Columbia, 3 components, the solid rocket boosters, external tank, and the orbiter itself. Now, right now, the astronauts are in the cockpit, in their work and live area. They were expecting to go off, about a half hour ago. Now, the problem at the moment, there was some difficulty, or at least anticipated difficulty, a hint of difficulty with a fuel cell back in this area a little earlier. That has faded. What they're looking into now is a computer problem, a potential computer problem. Now, the computers are located in this part of the spaceship, are they not?
They're located right below the cockpit, Dan.
A little closer up near the
Yes,
cockpit.
right, a little closer up near the cockpit, and in the middeck, it's called. There's 5 of them there, and also a spare on board they can connect in orbit if they need to. 4 of those computers are running and controlling the aircraft or spacecraft normally. They're the primary system. 1 is the backup. That's the computer that we're worried about at the moment. We don't know whether it's a computer problem or a software problem, and they're trying to figure that out.
Now, keep in mind that, of course, the spaceship is upright on the launch pad, and when you see those live pictures of the spacecraft on the launch pad, and perhaps Bill Linden, our director, could show us, there, you see it on the launch pad, but we have our model leaning down a little so we can show you. The astronauts are in the cockpit of that orbiter in this area. Now, Leo Krupp, there is a hatch back here. Why can't the astronauts go down in that hatch and work on that computer if necessary?
Well, since they're still on the ground, there's no need to do that, Dan.
Excuse me, Leo, the voice of shuttle control is up, and we'll listen to that.
This is shuttle launch control at T-minus 9 minutes and holding. We have been holding for approximately 35 minutes now. We have some concern now about the IMU pre-flight alignment. However, no decision has been made that we need to go farther back into the countdown at this present time. We have had a concern from the people watching the fuel cells that too much load was being placed on them, and we have now switched back to sharing with the ground power system. Present time, we're working the problem both here in the cabin at Houston at the Mission Control Center and here in the Kennedy Space Center with whether or not we have a proper backup software load in the flight computers. We expect to be hearing back something in the next few minutes about what should be done as far as continuing to hold at this particular point in the countdown. This is shuttle launch control.
Leo Krupp, you were saying that certainly there is a hatch in which the astronauts can go through that hatch. We're not nearly at the point where anybody would think about their going down and having a look at those computers.
No, I don't think they would attempt that while they're still on the pad, Dan. If they had a computer failure in flight, they could do an in-flight change out of the computer. But this doesn't appear to be a hardware problem with the computer. It appears to be a software load. So changing the computer probably would not solve this problem.
There are 2 mission controls, one at the Kennedy Space Center where we are here in Florida, the other, the main mission control. This is a scene at the Kennedy Space Center mission control where you can see that clump of people in the upper right-hand corner of your screen with furrowed brows, looking a little concerned and worried, as one would expect, with a hold in progress. Not necessarily something that's going to be a long delay. We simply don't know yet as they continue to check out the software of those computers. The main mission control in Houston, and Mort Dean is there, also following this delay in the space shuttle launch. Mort Dean, what do you hear, what do you know there?
Well, Dan, we're hearing pretty much what you're hearing. As you said, there are 2 mission controls. One is responsible for the launch from Florida, and the one here takes over, about 5, 6, or 7 seconds after the shuttle clears the tower. Sitting here with an astronaut and a former flight partner of Alan Bean's, Jack Lausma, who's a colonel in the Marines, a Marine pilot, and a man who is anxiously awaiting the future flights of the shuttle because he's going to be on board one of those shuttles. And Dan, we were discussing just how important the computers are on the shuttle, that the shuttle just can't fly without the help and aid of computers, Jack.
That's true, Mort. The
spacecraft has 5 computers on board, and they either accept manual or automatic inputs. However, all inputs have to go through the computer, and therefore it's necessary to have those computers all up and running well in order to fly this spacecraft. It is the computers that will fly this spacecraft automatically, with Crippen and Young doing very little of the actual piloting of the craft. The pilots can take over manually and fly via the computer, or the automatic system can fly it. In most cases, we'll allow the automatic system to fly it, but of course the trick in all the training is to ascertain whether or not the automatic system is working properly so that you'll know when to take over manual if necessary. And the current plan, if it goes as written, will mean that Commander Young will take over just before the shuttle touches down in Florida.
That's correct.
In California, at Edwards Air Force Base in California.
That's correct. When he gets into the atmosphere and slows down to an airspeed of Mach 0.85, then he will fly it manually all that way down to a landing. However, there are interim times during the reentry when he will take over manually and fly it for short periods of time as well.
Dan, during critical periods, those computers will perform 325,000 operations per second, each computer. But, you know, talking to Jack and some of the astronauts, other astronauts here, Dan, I can't help but think that once a pilot, always a pilot, and these pilots wish that perhaps they didn't have computers and could, in fact, pilot the shuttle on their own.
Morton Dean at Mission Control in Houston. We're back at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. We're out on pad 39A. The sun is up fairly far now. The crowds continue to grow here. Restless crowds as they have been throughout this delay. They had hoped to see the Space Shuttle Columbia lift off at 6:50 this morning Eastern Time. First there was a hint of possible trouble in a fuel cell. Now a hint of possible trouble in the computer and the computer software. That's what they're checking out. That's the reason for the delay. We'll have more on the shuttle delay in a moment.
When your retirement is all play because your money plan is doing all the work.
You really believe in those IDS ideas.
When we help your business grow because we helped your taxes shrink.
You really believe in those IDS ideas.
Good money ideas from your IDS representative. When they help your dreams come true.
You really believe in those IDS ideas.
Ideas to help you manage money from IDS.
For tomorrow's space communications, a company called TRW is building 6 satellites to serve as space switchboards. Soon, signals from dozens of different satellites will be collected and relayed to a single Earth station as a new communications era unfolds. Tomorrow is taking shape at a company called TRW.
I don't think you'll be able to get out of here until after the long time.
Space Shuttle Columbia on its pad. A delay in progress.
An announcement
on the
follows
launch.
in 30 seconds.
And we expect an announcement from Shuttle Control here at the Kennedy Space Center sometime over the next 20 to 30 seconds to bring us up to date on what they are finding out, if anything, about the smell of trouble. I don't mean literally the smell, the hint of trouble with one of the computers. Here is the voice of Shuttle Control, Hugh Harris.
This is Shuttle Launch Control at T-minus 9 minutes and holding. We have been holding now for approximately 45 minutes and have approximately 16 minutes remaining in the time before we would have to realign the IMUs. We have been told by Houston that they're extremely stable and we may be able to extend the hold slightly beyond what is normally contemplated. At the present time, we have not had a reading as to how we're
one suspect is a new configuration of BFS.
We're listening now to Houston, where they are talking about what may be the possible problem that caused the backup software to look as though it might not be satisfactory. But at the present time, we do not have a determination as to How long we may hold at this particular point, there has to be a decision in the near future as to whether to go back to a different point in the countdown. But at the present time, we're at T-minus 9 minutes and holding. This is Shuttle Launch Control.
Shuttle Launch Control explaining that the hold is still in progress. There is no indication of how serious this problem may be, if indeed it turns out to be the problem they think it is. That's the way it goes in the space business fairly often. The launch that was scheduled at 6:50 this morning, we don't know how long the delay is going to be. We're obviously in a delay that could stretch out for some time. On the other hand, we know from past experience that frequently these problems, once the mission control begins to look into them, check them out at the pad and with their own backup computers on the ground to check out these things, that they problems we don't imagine to have a way of disappearing in a hurry. That may be the case with this one. Joining me in our CBS News studios here at the Kennedy Space Center is Senator John Glenn of Ohio.
Morning.
59 years old, first American to orbit in outer space.
Ancient history by now.
Not ancient history at all. Senator Glenn, I know that you'd have to get in shape to make this flight, but you'd like to make it.
Sure would. I think anytime you've made one of these, you'd like to make every one of them yourself from then on.
You've been listening with us here at our studio. What do you make of this delay this morning? What's your guess?
Well, the longer it goes, I don't want to hang crepe on it already, but the longer it goes, the more difficult it is. You know, a problem that can be solved immediately, they get on and it's solved and away you go. The longer it goes like this, why, I don't know whether we're up today or not. Hard to tell. I still hope so, of course.
And we still have a long way to go if they can get the problem straightened out. That is, in terms of our the launch window for this day. Well, almost 6 hours still remaining in the launch day, so to speak.
The thing is, once they get beyond a certain point, then they have to recycle back again. That gets into potentially other problems, too. So I still hope we go today because the weather's good, and that's doubtful this time of year here in Florida, of course. So this has been an excellent day on the weather.
Senator, is it worth all this? You've got $14 billion in this program, talking about this space shuttle program. Everybody here this morning certainly pulling for it to get off and to get out there and for the astronauts to get back safely. But is it worth it?
Well, I think it is. And, you know, research is the easiest thing to cut because it's not like you're buying 6 trucks from General Motors or Ford. You're doing research. You don't know the objective of what you're out there for. It's like the first caveman. He looks over the hill, and they warned him, don't go over, it's dangerous over there. But he finds things. He finds a leaf that he rubs on a sore on his leg, and it becomes better. The boil becomes better or something. He finds better things to eat. His kids grow taller. It's the nature of research, and it's what we're laying down in this country, and other nations are picking up and going ahead of us. And that's why we're behind in automobiles. Why are we behind in steel? Why are other nations picking up this lead from us? And space is sort of the farthest out type, most basic research that we have. And so you're looking for new facts and new patterns, and along the way you find a lot of things come out of it in the way of new materials and new optics and new ways of making crystals for electronics and for computers and all of these things that do make it very, very much worthwhile. I think someone has run some studies showing that of the money spent so far on NASA, it has come back in new products and benefits to our economy of somewhere around 8 to 1 for every dollar spent. Now, even if that's off by a considerable factor, that's still a good advantage.
Now, that is the basic argument for the Space Shuttle program and for the space program in general. When you're back home in Ohio and people make an argument against the program or say, well, look, Senator, I don't want to be cynical about it, but I am a little skeptical about it, what do you consider to be the most valid argument against spending this kind of money on this kind of program?
Well, people have concerns because we're cutting back right now, of course, in budget cut times. We're cutting back on social programs that are of benefit to people, and it's very tough to say that we should continue with research at the same time that we are cutting social programs where people have problems with school lunches or with Social Security problems or veterans benefits that we're cutting or whatever. So it is difficult to argue against that, but I think even in a time of budget cuts, we're still well advised to spend some money looking out here into the future. If we let other nations, the Japanese, the Germans, whoever, out-innovate and out-invent and do more inquiry into the unknown, they will be the ones putting these new facts to use in taking over the economy of the world, and we will not be the world's leader for very long. So I think this money spent on research normally has a way of paying off in the future far beyond anything we normally see at the outset.
Wouldn't we have been better off to fire the Space Shuttle Columbia without the crew on the first shot?
Well, it's a saving of money. Once again, it's budget cutting. And I think we have enough confidence now in our engineers and the people that have run the NASA program up to now to know that they're not going to send something they don't believe is safe to go. Would we all feel a little bit better, I suppose, or a little bit more confident? Yes, I suppose we would. But I know that Young and Crippen out there right now don't have any doubt about this thing, or they wouldn't be out there ready to go.
Senator, briefly, what would be your choice for the next space project?
Well, I think once we get the shuttle launch.
Senator, pardon me, one moment. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but we have the voice of Shuttle Control.
And holding, but a decision has been made to recycle the count to the T-minus 20-minute point. This is a point at which we can hold for a longer period than at the T-minus 90-minute or 9-minute point. It also includes, though, a realignment of the inertial measurement unit. This occurs normally in the countdown at the T-minus 51-minute point. However, the other units on board the orbiter and on board the ground, the propulsion and the tanking and that sort of thing, can be held at the T-minus 20-minute point, even though we go back to 51 in the IMU align mode. We have not had a resolution yet of what the problem is with the backup flight computer programs, and are waiting for that resolution before going further. But right now, we are changing the clock back to the T-minus 20-minute point in the countdown, and this means that we will go ahead and also do an inertial measurement unit realignment, which occurred at the T-minus 51-minute point normally. This is Shuttle Launch Control.
Hugh Harrison, Shuttle Launch Control here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. What you heard is what you have. The Space Shuttle Columbia will remain on the pad while they try to work out at least the hint of trouble with the computer system. And until they determine whether there is in fact a problem and what the problem is, they aren't going to proceed with the launch. They've now backed it up to T-minus 20. In our studios, Senator John Glenn, and I know, Senator, that you have miles to make today, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to finish that answer of what your choice would be for the next project in space for this country.
Well, I think beyond the shuttle, we'd like to see a permanently orbiting space station and then use the shuttle for what it was the original concept was. It could ferry men, equipment, crews back and forth to do the long-term research that we can do in space. There are, you sort of look three directions from a spacecraft. You look on out into space. How does the sun form its energy? How does it get to Earth? That's where our energy comes from, except for starlight. And so you're looking out trying to find things like that. You're looking at things on board the spacecraft, where you're manufacturing new types of crystals, new kinds of metal, new kinds of serums and medicines that we can make far more pure in space than we can here on Earth from the way the scientists look at it right now. And then you're looking toward Earth, toward all the things on Earth, the Earth resources analysis capability, and all that's tremendously valuable in itself. Then the military, which will have probably a fourth of the future missions on the orbiter, what we can do in the way of surveillance, communications, defensive laser, particle beam weapons in the future, things like that. We don't want to see any other nation get ahead of us in that area. And so that's what we can do, not only with the orbiter, with this, but also with the permanently orbiting space station later on. So I would like to see us go to that eventually.
Thank you very much, Senator John Glenn. We appreciate you being with us this morning very much. And our CBS News coverage of the Space Shuttle Columbia will continue in just a moment.
This is CBS. This CBS News special report, Wings in Space, continues. Here again is Dan Rather.
T-minus 23 and holding now for the still hoped-for launch of the Space Shuttle Columbia. They have not yet worked out whether there is in fact a problem, and if there is a problem, how deep the problem goes with the computers. indication that the problem, if it exists, as they tend to believe that it does, may be in the software of the computers. Disappointment, of course, for the astronauts who are already in the orbiter, in the cockpit, just behind the, well, you can see what we would call the windshield or anything except a space orbiter. But there's plenty for the astronauts to do in there as they take part in helping to check out what this problem is and how deep it may go. The meaning of T-23 and counting, Leo Krupp and Al Bean, is that they have now rolled back the countdown, which is to say that if the problem were worked out right now, we would be 23 minutes from launch. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What they've had to do is, as you hold different amounts of time, you have to, because of the equipment that you've got operating, some of it needs realignment. For example, the reason they roll this back is that inertial measurement units need realignment. They moved it back to 23. They're going to align those so that they're perfectly aligned again, and then when they get ready to go, they'll be able to fly a more precise trajectory than if they just let these inertial measurement units sit there and slowly drift, although these seem to be working real well.
Leo Krupp is a representative of Rockwell, builder of this space shuttle, and as long as you've been in the space business, what about the question is that we are such a technologically advanced country that we tend to make these things too complicated, and that this may be an example. You've got 4 computers with a backup computer, a total of 5 on board. Do we make it too complicated? It seems to me, for example, that the Soviets' spacecraft are far less sophisticated and complicated. They seem to get on the pad and just throw them up there.
Well, Dan, there is a lot of complexity built into the shuttle, but it's not beyond the technology that we have available to us. And the fact that we have a computer problem, it's really not a problem in the computer, it's a problem in the programming of the software into the computer. And I'm sure that they'll correct this problem, and without the computer technology, we wouldn't be able to really fly an airplane as complex as the shuttle. And the Russians, or no other country, has a spacecraft that will do what this vehicle does as far as being launched into orbit as a spacecraft, coming back, flying like a conventional airplane. There's never been an airplane built that's going to fly